Evening, boys. Tonight we are going to embark on a journey, or we're going to start to embark on a journey, and that is through the House of Night series by PC and Kristen Cass. I read these books when I was younger. They came out in the aftermath of Twilight, and I preferred these not just because they were sexier than Twilight, but because, you know, the main character, the female main character, was actually the supernatural creature instead of just having a supernaturally powerful boyfriend. We like that, we like a bit of girl power in here. However, these books are not empowering in any way, shape, or form. You know, I've struggled with reading the entire series throughout my life because they just get so crazy towards the middle that I always kind of really wanted to know where they went. And so recently I did that. I don't know, I feel like I got this crazy urge to read Twilight because, like, there was like a resurgence of people talking about it. But the thing about Twilight is that, like, hearing people talk about Twilight is so much more interesting than reading Twilight itself or even watching the films. So there was no way I was going to do that. So I thought, why don't I finish the House of Night series for the first time in my entire life? And so that's what I've done, and it was an undertaking. Without further ado, I am going to attempt to retell the story of the House of Night series to you with my additional hilarious notes. So, we begin with the first book, Marked. The protagonist of our series is named Zoe, and in this book she is marked. This means this universe, instead of being bitten by a vampire, and that's how you become a vampire, like, a vampire tracker tracks you down, and like he holds out his hand and he says this weird thing to you, and then you get marked. Supposedly being a vampire is this physiological thing, so I don't know what the tracker has to do with the actual marking itself, other than just letting you know that it's happened. But then if he was just letting you know that it had happened, it would happen if he wasn't there anyway, and they make it seem like he's essential. Oh no, I'm already getting into plot points and plot holes. This is not good. I'm just trying to explain what marking is. Essentially, Zoe gets marked. The tracker fucks off. He's got nothing to do with it. And she's now got to go to the House of Night, which is essentially a boarding school for vampires. Or she'll die, because part of this physiological change means that you have to be around adult vampires, or you'll just reject the change completely and die outright. So she freaks out, and she's got kind of a dysfunctional family, so she runs off to her grandma, who's her closest relative, and she ends up falling over and hitting her head, and she has a vision. And in this vision is the vampire goddess Nyx, who is the embodiment of night. And Nyx basically tells her, "Hey Zoe, you're my special girl, and you're gonna mean a lot to me, and you know, I'm gonna make sure everybody knows it." And when Zoe wakes up, she's not just got a crescent moon on her forehead like all the other vampire fledglings, which just means young vampires. She has like a fully coloured in one. She's marked out from the very beginning as being unusual. As you can kind of see, Zoe is a bit of a Mary Sue, to put it lightly, but well, you'll get to know Zoe a lot better as we go through this. But Zoe gets to the House of Night eventually, and she is on the way to her dorm room, and she hears like a whisper from this corridor, right? It's never explained where this whisper comes from, so we're to assume that it's the goddess Nyx again, you know, giving Zoe direction. But the thing that Nyx has directed Zoe to is a boy who is rejecting a girl who's trying to give him a blowjob. So essentially Nyx is showing Zoe a boy being like sexually assaulted, and Zoe like doesn't do anything about it. So Nyx clearly isn't wanting her to intervene and save this guy. So we're led to believe that Nyx is leading her to the guy, right? Because they lock eyes and they have this moment. However, this guy, spoiler alert, does not turn out to be Zoe's main love interest, and he actually turns out to be a bit of a dick. So it's weird that Nyx would be leading her to him. Which brings me to my one and only theory that I have about this entire series, and that's that Nyx was instead leading Zoe to the girl being Aphrodite, who in this book is a bit of an antagonist towards Zoe, but quickly becomes like a good character and one of the best characters in the series, I'm not gonna lie. The series is a nightmare, but one of its few redeeming qualities is Aphrodite. Also just a weird intro scene for a love interest anyway. Like obviously Zoe and Eric do end up dating for a while, and it's really strange that you would choose to introduce a love interest by having him be in like a sexual encounter with another girl, like despite whether he's like telling her no or not, you know. It's this is a really weird situation, and it's never addressed as like an assault situation either. It's just kind of addressed as like Aphrodite's a little bit of a slag and this is just the way that she acts sometimes. Actually, Zoe does vilify Eric for this blowjob a few times, but we'll get into that a little bit later, and the fucking weird implications of that a little bit later. We meet Zoe's friends. Zoe's friends consist of Stevie Ray, who's essentially like this caricatured bumpkin, and she's like really sweet and innocent, and she's Zoe's roommate and best friend, right? She introduces Zoe to her other friends, Damien, whose character traits are he's smart and he's gay, and the twins, who are interchangeable. The main information we get about them is that they came to the House of Night on the same day, and they like can complete each other's sentences, and they just feel really close and stuff. Even though one of them is black and one of them is white, I don't know why we can't feel close to someone. For that reason, but this is just the way the book puts it to us. I'm gonna put it out here right now, there is some really clunky and like low-key unintentionally homophobic things said about Damien throughout the text. Like I remember one conversation that they have is like, I'm pretty sure it's Stevie Ray says she doesn't think Damien counts as a boy because he's gay, and you know Damien counters this and he says, oh, I think I should count as more than one guy because blah blah blah, and you know he does kind of counter that it is a bit of a homophobic thing to say. Just the fact that they thought this was like an acceptable thing to put in a book that like normal teenagers were like saying to each other is just like a sign of the times more than anything. There are times when it becomes a lot more problematic than just like aging poorly. But maybe we'll get into that a little bit later, because I've not even started the proper plot of the book yet, and this is one of the few books in the series that actually has a plot, so I better get on with it. So before she got marked, Zoe had like this on-again, off-again boyfriend called Heath, and he's obviously still a human, and he turns up with Zoe's old best friend Kayla, and they're there to like, you know, see her and in secret and stuff, and they climb over the wall. Zoe kind of gets jealous of Kayla and thinks that she's after her ex-boyfriend, so she like scares her away, and then she accidentally ends up drinking Heath's blood. I think he like grazed his hand coming up the wall or something. Yeah, it's, well, vampires drink blood, right? It's not that weird. She does this after she has attended a Dark Daughters ritual, which is led by Aphrodite, the character I mentioned earlier, who's kind of the bully. And Zoe decides that she doesn't like Aphrodite based on just a few encounters, and she kind of just assumes that Aphrodite is like using her power as leader of the Dark Daughters, which is like this elite society among the fledglings, for like bad instead of good. And like she decides this after like 2 days of being at the school, from like based on very little evidence, like just from like things her friends have said that we don't really know we can trust them yet, even if they seem like nice people to her, but actually like the twins especially are just as bitchy as Aphrodite is, so it doesn't really make any sense. I don't know. Anyway, Zoe decides that she's going to usurp Aphrodite and take over the Dark Daughters, even though from the beginning Zoe has said that all she wants to do is fit in and be normal. So you would think that as, you know, normal as you can be in this new vampire school is to not try and take over the Dark Daughters, but okay, she thinks she's doing it for the greater good because Aphrodite's a bitch. Whatever, I can get past it. So Aphrodite takes them out of the school for Halloween to do a ritual, right? And they like summon their ancestral spirits, and Aphrodite fucks up with the herbs and stuff that she uses in the spell, and so she lets bad spirits into their circle, and she gets possessed, and then Heath turns up looking for Zoe. The spirits nearly kill Heath, but Zoe manages to save the day obviously, because earlier in the book we found out that her friends have also been given like spiritual gifts related to the elements so that they can all create a ritual circle together and, you know, just basically kick ass in any way, shape, or form that the book sees fit. So they all save the day, and Neferet, who's like the high priestess of the school, basically the head teacher, she shows up and she kicks Aphrodite off the Dark Daughters, and also kind of behind the scenes, like Zoe's been kind of seeing that Eric guy who Aphrodite was after, but that relationship is like kind of pushed to the background because like I think the book wants us to think that Zoe isn't really bothered about boys, but that is definitely a thing that we are told and not shown. The setup for their relationship though is weird. Like it almost seems that like Zoe is meant to be this like uber uptight good girl who like doesn't even like a bit of like underage drinking on the weekends or anything like that. And Eric, although he's not like an all-out bad guy, he seems very laissez-faire when it comes to the rules and stuff. And obviously he went out with Aphrodite, who's like a full-on bad bitch. It seemed like their dynamic was going to be a case of like where they could learn from each other, where Zoe was going to, you know, teach Eric to be more bothered when the rule breaking was mean in the way that Aphrodite would do it to bully people. And Eric could maybe teach Zoe how to bend the rules when it was for the greater good, right? This does not happen, but this is just the setup that it seemed to be giving us. And you will find that there are a lot of cases in this book where there is a very clear setup that goes nowhere. Something that is set up in this book, and it is only resolved later in the series, is like Zoe keeps seeing the ghosts of kids who have rejected the change and died on campus. She only sees them briefly, and then there is like a moment where we find out that they're solid, and so it's like these zombie vampires, like what's going on? We never get any kind of resolution for that, and I guess this is supposed to be our motivation to keep reading. But like as this first book goes, like it's actually got like quite a concise story, and it is kind of like it's a good story for the first book in a series. Like you come in, you realize you've got this responsibility from a powerful goddess, and you use it to like usurp a mean kid at your school and beat a bully. It's like it's low tension. It's a good place to start in a fantasy series as far as I'm concerned. One issue that I do have is that Zoe is a complete bitch. It is never acknowledged in a way that I find satisfying that Zoe is in fact a bitch. Like I said, there's supposed to be this whole girl power element to the text, and I just don't identify with that at all. Zoe takes the mick out of all types of girls throughout her narrative, that she must alienate every type of woman there is out there, and so there's no one left for her to identify with. I don't know why that would be a good trait to have in your character, like to take the mick out of girls who dye their hair black, girls who wear too much eyeliner, girls who give blowjobs. Plus, of course, the entire way throughout the series, but especially in these early books, everybody has to comment on how original and unusual Zoe's mark is. And for some reason, even before Zoe has done anything, everybody keeps insisting that she must be special, and it wouldn't be as annoying if she'd already kind of displayed some kind of anything, but they just assume it right off the bat. They're like, that girl, she's special, I just know it. And yeah, the mark is a clue, but come on guys, it could just be a fluke, right? The writing is bad, okay? I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that it's masterful or anything. It's bad in this book in the way that any trashy romance novel is bad. You know, it's nothing special, it's easy to read and digest. And you know, you're not here for the crafted writing, you're here for the content and, you know, pretending that you're a magical girl with a lot of vampire guys fawning over you and stuff. There's a lot of okay characters and ideas, like especially the idea about getting marked and like rejecting the change. Those are really interesting. And, you know, there's the promise that a lot of law questions are going to be answered throughout the course of this series, but you know, we don't know whether that's the case because this is just the first book. I just want to mention the entire course of that story did take place over the course of 4 days, and this can give you a little bit of an idea of how quickly the narrative moves, but you wouldn't believe how much it drags at some points throughout the series. Just a lot of talking and a lot of recapping, but I'll talk to you about that more at the end because that is more of a whole series note. As far as the first book goes, I like it well enough. It's kind of crazy for me to read this first book and see how kind of normal it is, and to think about where the series ended up, because it is a whole trip and it's pretty fucked. It goes to places. It goes to places. We'll do 2 books in one, why not? The second book is Betrayed. A month has passed since Zoe has taken over the Dark Daughters, and she is gearing up to do her first ritual as leader. It's Parents' Day. Have more time with Zoe's parents. She doesn't have a very good relationship with her mother anymore because of her stepdad. He's like a religious freak. He belongs to this universe's version of Christianity, the people of faith, who are very dead set against vampires because they think they're some kind of like abomination or something. I don't know. We also meet Damien's parents. Listen, there's this bit on page 2. Yeah, they clearly want to introduce that Damien is gay, and this is the way that they choose to do that. Damien sniffed, looking offended and superior, and gayer than he usually looked, even though he is definitely gay. Honestly, like, I told you about the clunky, like, 2000s kind of rhetoric that was being used in the last book, and honestly, they did use the R word a couple of times in there. That was the first time I actually cringed, but it was not the last. It's just a really bad way to introduce that your character is gay. Like, if you really want to do it in, like, the first line that you introduce him just to get it out of the way, like have him check out a guy or something. Don't say he's acting gayer than usual. What does that even mean? Anyway, Damien's parents appreciate the fact that he's a vampire more than the fact that he's gay, and that's an interesting concept that nothing comes of, so I'm just throwing that out there. We also meet Aphrodite's parents, who are like straight up evil and are like, you need to take your position back as a leader of the Dark Daughters or we're gonna like disown you or some shit. And we start to see Aphrodite here as like a sympathetic character who's been raised by these 2 really cold people, and so maybe doesn't really know how to relate to people that well. I also feel more sympathetic towards her because she goes to Nepheret. Like, Aphrodite has these visions of like future disasters, and she goes to Nepheret to tell her about one, and Nepheret suggests that maybe Nyx has turned her back on Aphrodite, and this makes us feel really bad for Aphrodite, but it also introduces a kind of other side to Nepheret, who until now has been this benevolent force among the students. Nepheret, of course, being the like high priestess, head teacher of the school. This is a really good introduction to what will be a villain arc, you know, a really good introduction to the fact that Nepheret is not what she seems, and it's unfortunate that this does not continue to be subtle and, you know, good. If it had been left at this and maybe a few other things throughout the novel, I could have accepted it, but as you'll see, it just goes way too far. Zoe is like meant to be researching for this ritual she's meant to have been doing, even though she's had an entire month to do this research, and she ends up flirting with a teacher instead who's called Loren. You know, that's pretty problematic in itself, and we'll talk about the specifics of that a little bit later, but for now we'll talk about the fact that like all I've seen Zoe do this entire time is like cut classes, not do research, and be excused from certain homework because she's like such an advanced student already, even though she's done nothing. And that really annoys me. When she sees Aphrodite go to Nepheret about this vision, she actually thinks that Aphrodite is tattling about her flirting with Loren, and it's really annoying because Zoe is like really under the impression that everything is about her. Later on in the book, her literal best friend is literally dying, and she doesn't notice the signs because she thinks that this best friend is just worried about her, Zoe. She thinks that the symptoms of this kid dying is because this kid is so worried about her best friend that she's known for a month. Okay, Zoe. There's more Loren seduction. It's really weird. Like, the relationship is meant to be treated as romantic, but like all of the cliches are in there, like about how he apparently makes Zoe feel so grown up, and like maybe the rules don't apply to her because she's a mature student. It's so weird. Aphrodite has a vision about a bridge collapsing, which turns out to be true, so this proves that Nepheret is lying. So this could be interpreted as maybe Nefer is just against Aphrodite and doesn't necessarily hint that she's a villain, and it still acts as a good setup. So I still like this, and I still don't think it's too much. Zoe sees Heath in town and they end up making out in a car because he cuts himself again. It turns out that they've imprinted, which is like basically if a vampire drinks a human's blood, they become like spiritually connected or something. And it turns out that Zoe can remote view him, and like she sees him getting a boner because he knows like she's there. So that's interesting. There are humans dying, and it looks like vampire attacks. So the police question Zoe. For some reason, I think they found like her necklace there, and they were kids that were like vaguely related to her when she was a human. So she gets investigated. You see Neferet having her blood sucked by one of the dead kids that I mentioned from the last book. And, you know, this so very clearly outs her as a villain and having something to do with these resurrected kids that have been very clearly portrayed as like a wrongness. We're in the second book, and you've outed like what I am to assume is the main villain of the series, and who is in fact the main villain of the series. It's a really stupid step. It's like they couldn't wait to reveal the fact that she was the villain, and it feels like this a lot throughout the series. Like they get an idea and they just can't wait to write about it, so there's no sense of pacing before it just happens, and it's like, oh okay, I've got to deal with this now. If there was some setup through this book, it would have been better if there was like just the setup in this book, and maybe Neferet was revealed to be a villain in the next book, but that is not what we got, unfortunately. After this, Neferet like takes credit for some of Zoe's ideas at the Dark Daughters meeting, and like it just seems so petty and childish after the fact that she's being so clearly outed as like this evil person who's letting dead kids feed off her blood. So yeah, that was a silly move, and if you were going to do that at all, you should have done it before the big reveal that was like, oh hey, she's a bad guy. Stevie Ray dies, which was a cheap shot because she was the character that we knew the most about besides Zoe. And obviously you're not going to kill off the main character. The one that we were closest to, the one that was the most childlike and actually likable because of all those reasons. And yeah, it was just a cheap shot. And she comes back from the dead. So, you know, my preteen self cried over this death for nothing. Heath gets kidnapped by the dead kids, who are the ones who have been killing the human teenagers. And because Zoe can remote view him, she goes to save him. And one of the dead kids is Stevie Ray. And so Zoe promises to go back for Stevie Ray and save her. But she also kills one of the other dead kids, like for real this time, by setting them on fire. So, yeah, that was a death that Zoe caused and is never acknowledged. The real icing on the cake for me was that Neferet like wipes Zoe's memory at the end of the book, which is fine. We already know she's a villain. She's allowed to wipe Zoe's memory, but Zoe fights off the memory wipe and like blatantly lets Neferet know that she's done this. And so now not only do we know that the High Priestess is actually a villain, but she's also now Zoe's open enemy, at least as far as they relate to each other. So like the stakes from the first book have been raised like so much, and it is only the second book, and it's like pacing, my guy. Some of my notes about this book is, you know, there's a fantasy about having a really accepting friend group and a friend group that really like loves you and just like accepts you as who you are. But like in this book it kind of comes off as a cult because they also see Zoe as like this leader because she's going to be a high priestess one day, and so she just kind of is a bitch to them and bosses them around, and they just end up throughout the series becoming like subservients. And yeah, it's a bit cultish. The language in this book, like the teen speak, was really awful. Like they used cool as an adjective like several times, and like Zoe kept saying hello like sarcastically, and it was just really annoying. I think I'm gonna wrap it up for now, but that has been our opening foray into the House of Night series. I hope you have somewhat enjoyed it, and I hope you join me next time when we'll be looking into the next few books. There's a lot of them, just so you know, and we are nowhere near completion. Night.